Mr. Speaker, I come to this chamber, Mr. Speaker, every week to ask sensible questions, and I expect sensible answers. But all I get is glazed expressions and waffle, and from the opposite bench.
Lee Anderson didn't just call out Keir Starmer, he ripped him to shreds live on national TV. It wasn't a polite disagreement, it was a demolition job. Starmer thought he could get away with the usual polished politician routine, dodging questions, smirking at the camera, throwing out pre-scripted lines. But Anderson wasn't having it. What happened next left Starmer looking like a deer caught in headlights, completely exposed in front of millions. And trust me, the clip is already going viral because it was one of the most humiliating moments Starmer has ever faced. Let's set the scene. Starmer was in full Prime Minister mode, that usual mix of smugness and carefully crafted sound bites. You know the look, chin up, rehearsed pauses, like he's already writing his own history books. But this time, the script didn't go the way he expected. Anderson stood up and asked the question Starmer has been dodging for months. Why is Labour pushing ahead with policies that are crushing ordinary people while delivering nothing measurable in return? Simple, clear, direct. No jargon, no waffle. And the moment the question landed, you could see it. Starmer froze. His trademark calm expression cracked. For a split second, he looked like a man who had been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. And instead of giving a straight answer, he went straight into his usual defence mechanism: deflect, distract, attack. He mumbled something about growth and jobs, tried to turn it into a joke about Anderson, and even dragged Reform UK into the conversation. It was classic Starmer. When he's cornered, he lashes out. But Anderson wasn't going to let him escape that easily. He cut right through the nonsense and hit Starmer again. This time, he didn't just ask a question, he laid out the facts, live on air, in front of everyone. Billions wasted, taxes rising, benefits being slashed, industries shutting down, all while Starmer insists Britain is somehow leading the world. Anderson reminded him and the viewers at home that Britain is only responsible for a tiny fraction of global emissions. Even if we went completely carbon neutral tomorrow, the effect on the planet's temperature would be almost zero. That's when the tension in the studio turned electric. You could almost hear the producers in the control room panicking. Starmer shifted in his seat, his face turning redder by the second, trying desperately to regain control. But Anderson wasn't finished. He accused Starmer of pushing policies that punish ordinary families while letting the wealthy and powerful off the hook. He brought up the winter fuel cuts, the disability benefit squeeze, the job losses in manufacturing, and he did it with the kind of blunt honesty that Starmer couldn't swat away. And here's the thing, the audience could feel it too. This wasn't just another political spat. This was a real moment of reckoning. Anderson was saying out loud what millions of people have been thinking, that the entire green agenda, the endless talk of net zero, has become a dangerous obsession that's hurting Britain more than it's helping. And instead of answering the question, Starmer just kept smirking and throwing out one-liners, hoping the moment would pass. It didn't. By the end of the exchange, Starmer looked completely rattled. His usual controlled image was gone. He had no real answer, no numbers, no science, just slogans. And Anderson knew it. He delivered his final line like a hammer blow, saying it's time for a Prime Minister who will tell the truth, not hide behind PR spin. The crowd reaction said it all: gasps, murmurs, and even a few laughs at Starmer's expense. It was brutal. And here's why this moment matters, because Starmer can't afford to keep losing these exchanges. Each time he dodges a question, each time he mocks instead of answers, it chips away at his image of being the grown-up in the room. People are starting to see through it. Anderson just ripped the mask off in front of the entire country. The fallout was immediate. Within minutes of the exchange, clips of Anderson's takedown started spreading like wildfire across social media. Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, all flooded with the same 30-second moment of Anderson asking the question and Starmer squirming in his seat. People weren't just sharing it, they were cheering it on. Comments poured in, calling it the first real grilling. Starmer has faced in months with others saying it was the moment the mask slipped. It wasn't just Reform UK supporters, either even disillusioned Labour voters admitted. Anderson had a point. This wasn't partisan politics anymore. This was about holding the most powerful man in Britain to account. And the more Starmer's defenders tried to spin it, the worse it got. They claimed Anderson was grandstanding, that his question was too simplistic, that climate change is a global issue that can't be solved in a soundbite. But that excuse only made Starmer look weaker, because if the question was so easy, why couldn't the Prime Minister answer it? Meanwhile, Anderson doubled down. He went on radio the next morning and repeated the question word for word, daring Starmer to respond with a number. Just one number, he said. Tell the British people how much their sacrifices will actually cool the planet. It was devastatingly effective because it was simple. No politician wants to admit that spending billions will barely make a dent. And yet that's exactly what Starmer would have to say if he was honest. The truth is brutal. Britain's net zero policy is symbolic at best, self-destructive at worst. Anderson made sure everyone watching understood that. But what made this clash truly explosive was how Starmer handled it afterward. Instead of taking the hit and moving on, he sent his team out to attack Anderson personally. Briefings were leaked to the press, accusing Anderson of dog whistle politics, claiming he was playing to the far right. It was a classic Westminster move, smear the messenger, so you don't have to answer the message. But it backfired spectacularly, because the more they attacked Anderson, the more people replayed the clip and asked themselves why Starmer still hadn't answered the question. The hashtag #answer the question started trending, with thousands of ordinary voters demanding a straight response from the Prime Minister. Even some Labour backbenchers were reportedly frustrated, saying privately that Starmer should have just given a factual answer and moved on. And here's the kicker, this wasn't just about net zero anymore. This moment became a symbol of everything people hate about modern politics. The dodging, the spinning, the smugness, the refusal to level with the public. Anderson tapped into a very raw nerve. People are tired of being lectured to by politicians who never feel the pain of their own policies. They're tired of being told to pay higher energy bills for the planet, while MPs get taxpayer-funded expenses to heat their second homes. They're tired of seeing their town struggle, while London celebrates hitting arbitrary carbon targets. Anderson put all of that anger into words, and he did it in a way that made Starmer look completely out of touch. The press couldn't ignore it either. Headlines the next day were brutal. Starmer stumped. Anderson asks the question no one in Labour can answer. Net zero nightmare for PM. Even normally friendly outlets had to admit the exchange was a disaster for Starmer. The footage played on repeat on morning TV shows, with commentators calling it the moment Reform UK finally broke through. Some said it reminded them of those iconic political moments that changed the direction of a campaign. A single question that lingers in voters' minds long after the news cycle moves on. And that's what makes this so dangerous for Starmer. The question isn't going away. It's simple enough that anyone can repeat it, and damning enough that every time Starmer refuses to answer, he looks weaker. And if you think Starmer was angry during the exchange, insiders say he was livid afterward. Reports from Downing Street claimed he tore into his advisors for not preparing him with a good line, blaming them for letting Anderson ambush him on live TV. But here's the truth, no amount of prep could have saved him. Because this wasn't a clever political trap. This was a question he should have been able to answer months ago. The fact that he couldn't speaks volumes. Anderson didn't just expose a weakness, he exposed the entire illusion Labour has been selling about net zero being good for the economy. He turned what was supposed to be Starmer's strength into his biggest vulnerability. And that's why this moment matters far beyond one fiery exchange. It's not just about Starmer looking uncomfortable for a few seconds, it's about the narrative shifting. For months, Labour has framed net zero as a moral mission, a patriotic duty. Anderson reframed it as an economic disaster, a costly obsession that's hurting ordinary people. And because Starmer didn't answer, that framing stuck. People are now asking questions they weren't asking before. If this policy costs billions but barely moves the needle on climate change, why are we doing it? Who benefits? And why does the Prime Minister refuse to say the quiet part out loud? By the next 48 hours, it wasn't just a bad clip, it was a full-blown crisis. Labour's media machine went into overdrive trying to contain the damage, but every move they made only made the story bigger. First, they tried ignoring it. Big mistake. The clip was everywhere, trending on X, shared in WhatsApp groups, reposted by influencers who don't usually talk politics. People who hadn't watched a single PMQS all year suddenly knew Lee Anderson's question by heart. Then Labour tried the classic context defence, releasing a press statement about their net zero plan filled with jargon and buzzwords, talking about growth opportunities and future-proofing Britain's economy. But it was too late. The public had already made up their mind. To them, this wasn't about some long-term vision for 2050. It was about why their energy bills are sky-high right now, why their factories are closing right now, why their parents are getting letters about losing their winter fuel payments right now. Starmer's technocratic response made him sound even more detached, like he was speaking to a room of economists rather than the British public. Anderson, on the other hand, understood the mood perfectly. He didn't back down. He kept hammering away in interview after interview, framing the entire debate as elites versus ordinary people. He painted Starmer as a man obsessed with climate targets at the expense of pensioners, factory workers, and small business owners. "This isn't about the planet," Anderson said on GB News. "This is about Westminster politicians patting themselves on the back while the rest of the country freezes." That line hit like a thunderclap because it felt true. People are angry, and Anderson gave them a target for that anger Starmer and his net zero obsession. Inside Labour HQ, panic started to set in. Reports leaked that Rachel Reeves held an emergency strategy session with senior advisors, trying to find a way to stop the bleeding. Some wanted Starmer to come out and finally give a straight answer, to just say the number and move on. Others warned that doing so would be political suicide because it would confirm Anderson's point, that all the sacrifices, all the spending, all the economic pain would barely change global temperatures. In other words, there was no good answer. Starmer was stuck. The longer he stayed silent, the weaker he looked. But if he spoke, he risked shattering the entire narrative Labour had built around net zero being a bold, world-leading plan. And that's when the story escalated even further, because Anderson turned his question into a campaign. He started challenging Starmer directly on social media, posting videos calling him out by name. "Prime Minister, I'm asking you again. Just tell the British people the truth. How much will net zero lower global temperatures? You've had 72 hours to come up with an answer. We're still waiting." It was devastatingly effective, because it wasn't just a political debate anymore. It was a man publicly taunting the most powerful figure in the country. Every hour that passed without a reply made Starmer look more evasive. The media smelled blood. Pundits who usually give Starmer an easy ride started asking uncomfortable questions. The BBC's flagship political show dedicated an entire segment to the questions Starmer won't answer, bringing on experts who admitted that Anderson's numbers were broadly correct. The UK's carbon footprint is too small to significantly impact global temperatures on its own. The narrative flipped overnight. Starmer wasn't the responsible grown-up leading Britain through a climate crisis. He was the politician pushing costly policies without being honest about their impact. Even international media picked it up. American outlets started comparing it to their own debates about climate policy, with one headline reading, "UK PM stumped by simple question on net zero." Could this happen here? Suddenly, this was no longer a minor moment in British politics. It was a global embarrassment, and Starmer knew it. Behind closed doors, sources claimed he was furious not just at Anderson, but at his own team for letting it spiral out of control. He reportedly snapped at aides, saying, "We can't let Reform UK define this debate." But the damage was already done. Reform UK didn't just define the debate, they owned it. Anderson's question became a rallying cry. Memes popped up everywhere mocking Starmer's silence, with captions like "still waiting" and "answer the question, Keir." The longer it went on, the more it felt like a symbol of everything wrong with the establishment. And here's the most dangerous part for Starmer. This wasn't just hurting him in Westminster. Polling started to shift. Focus groups showed swing voters saying they were disappointed that Starmer couldn't give a straight answer. Some even said they respected Anderson more because at least he says what he thinks. That's the nightmare scenario for Labour, not just losing arguments in Parliament, but losing the perception war with voters who were supposed to be their base. And with an election on the horizon, moments like this can turn into defining moments. After nearly a full week of silence, the pressure finally became unbearable. Starmer couldn't hide forever. The media circus had grown too loud, the hashtags too viral, and the polls too worrying. Labour strategists knew they needed to stop the bleeding before the narrative hardened, so they lined up a big primetime interview, hoping Starmer could reset the conversation. But instead of putting the controversy to bed, the interview turned into another disaster. Sitting under the bright studio lights, Starmer was asked the same question Anderson had asked days earlier. "Prime Minister," the host pressed, "by how much would Britain reaching net zero reduce global temperatures?" It was the moment everyone had been waiting for. And incredibly, Starmer dodged again. He spoke for almost 3 minutes without once giving a number. He talked about Britain's moral duty, about inspiring the rest of the world, about leading by example. But he never answered the question. And when the interviewer pushed him a second time, his irritation boiled over. "This obsession with one number is a distraction," he snapped, accusing his critics of doing the work of climate deniers. That clip went nuclear. Not only had Starmer refused to give a straight answer, he had effectively called millions of sceptical voters climate deniers for even asking the question. Anderson wasted no time pouncing. Within minutes, he released a blistering video saying, "This is what Starmer thinks of you. Ask a fair question, and he smears you as a denier." He thinks ordinary people don't deserve straight answers. It was political dynamite. Comment sections erupted with anger. People didn't see a strong leader. They saw a man talking down to them, dismissing their concerns with moral superiority. The phrase distraction became a running joke online, with memes of Starmer dodging questions about everything from taxes to train delays, all captioned, "Stop distracting me." At this point, even Labour insiders started leaking frustration to the press. One unnamed MP reportedly said, "We've turned a one-day story into a one-month nightmare." Another admitted, "The public doesn't like being told they're wrong for asking questions." Keir should have just given a straight answer, but the damage was already done. By refusing to engage honestly, Starmer had turned a simple policy question into a national conversation about trust. If he couldn't be transparent about net zero, what else was he hiding? That doubt began creeping into everything he said afterwards. Every speech, every promise was now viewed through the lens of, will he actually tell us the truth? Anderson, meanwhile, looked like the man of the hour. Reform UK seized the moment, framing themselves as the only party willing to speak plainly about the cost of net zero. Their membership reportedly spiked, donations surged, and Anderson became the face of a growing movement of voters angry at what they see as a political class detached from reality. Even some Conservative MPs quietly praised him, saying he had said what many of us have been thinking for years. Suddenly, a backbencher from Reform UK was dictating the terms of the national debate, something Starmer and his team had never anticipated. But perhaps the most devastating part for Starmer was how this moment changed the public mood. Pollsters found that trust in Labour's economic plan dropped sharply after the controversy, with many voters now questioning whether the net zero timetable was even realistic. Among working-class voters, a group Starmer desperately needs to win, the reaction was even harsher. They felt mocked, ignored, even insulted. One focus group participant summed it up perfectly. "He talks about the future, but we're worried about today. Anderson spoke for us. Starmer didn't." In the end, what was supposed to be just another routine political exchange had turned into one of the defining moments of Starmer's leadership. It exposed not just a policy gap, but a character gap, the inability to look the country in the eye and give them a straight answer. Anderson may have been just one man asking one question, but in doing so, he ripped open a debate Labour had hoped to avoid until after the election. And now it's out in the open, and it isn't going away. So here's the takeaway. This wasn't just a win for Lee Anderson. It was a warning shot to every politician who thinks they can coast on polished soundbites and empty slogans. The public is done being lectured. They want honesty, they want answers, and they can tell when a politician is stalling. Starmer had the chance to show real leadership. Instead, he showed arrogance, evasiveness, and contempt for the very people he wants to lead. That's why this moment will be remembered not just as the day Lee Anderson destroyed Keir Starmer live on TV, but as the day the illusion cracked and Britain started demanding something better.